I don't know what I'm feeling now. I'm so disconnected with my current emotions that like even in therapy sessions, it's so common like when we ask clients, what are you feeling now? The most common response is, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. And the other one is, where do you feel the emotion in your body?
I don't know, or I don't feel anything.
Even when my therapist asked me, oh, what are you feeling right now? I actually felt quite like annoyed or like frustrated.
Are you asking me this question?
Yeah, I already told you that I don't know like so many times already, right? And that itself is not just a sign of CEN, but that somewhere along the line, you received the information or the signal that your emotions were not something to be accepted.
Or to be felt or to be accepted.
Correct.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Untangled Mind podcast, helping you navigate to your truest self one conversation at a time. I'm Noor, trauma recovery therapist and relationship coach.
And I'm Ron, a therapist, advocate, and writer. And for today's episode, we have a very special topic. And it's something that's been discussed a lot on social media. And if you've been in therapy before, you might have heard of this term before. It's called childhood emotional neglect.
Yeah.
Right. It's a topic that a lot of our clients bring into the therapy room, but then even though there's been quite a few discussions surrounding it, we still feel like there's a lot of misconceptions and not so true ideas about childhood emotional neglect.
Yeah, I think that's so true, Ron. I feel that this term, childhood emotional neglect, is tossed around a lot on like social media. I feel like I see a lot of it, and I feel that it is important for us to be able to understand it correctly so that we are able to see whether is it something that we've been through before, and
Right.
that's the intention of today's episode. We want to deep dive into it to understand what CEN is all about,
Right.
what are the common symptoms, and ways on how you can actually help yourself through it.
Of course.
Right.
And I think another thing that we want to do is dismantle some key myths surrounding CEN.
Yeah. So when we're talking about CEN, I feel it's not really about what happened, but more about what didn't happen for you, right? I feel a lot of individuals today, a lot of adults, they struggle with these invisible wounds. And they can't quite put a finger as to what it is that feels off or feels misaligned, but they know that something just doesn't quite feel right.
It's off, right? So it's something like missing. So I feel like many of us have experienced this situation where maybe our friends or even our therapists, they ask us, oh, how was your childhood like? And then we're like, oh, it's fine. Nothing.
It was okay.
Yeah, nothing major happened. I don't have any like trauma or anything.
Yeah.
But the issue is that we still feel like there's something
Missing.
off, right? Yeah, there's something missing. And this leads to some issues that we still feel even as adults, like maybe low self-esteem or this constant sense of like loneliness or I don't feel like I really belong anywhere. And then something that's also very true is we don't know what we're feeling right now, right? And this is what we call a lack of emotional vocabulary, the vocabulary that we use to describe what we're feeling right now. And this is the tricky thing about CEN, right? Because it's, I think, just hopping on what you say, it's not about what happened to us, but what didn't happen.
Yeah.
And it doesn't leave any scars, it doesn't leave much bruises.
Yeah, there's no physical bruises.
Exactly. Which is what most people think about when they think of trauma.
Yeah.
Right? But what it does leave is gaps. This nothingness, this numbness, this I don't know what I'm feeling right now, this disconnect from your emotions.
Yeah.
And this is why a lot of people, even if they don't identify with having childhood trauma, they still feel like maybe their childhood really wasn't perfect.
Yeah. The thing with CEN is that it's not your typical overt, obvious trauma that you hear about often, which is, being hit, being screamed at.
Exactly.
It's not that type. It is still a form of trauma. It's what we call the relational trauma.
Correct.
Right? Because CEN is essentially that absence of that consistent emotional presence and safety from your primary caregivers. Like, you could be in situations growing up in childhood where you had all your physical needs met, right? Perhaps, you remembered, your parents sending you to school, driving you to school, picking you up, cooking your favorite meals at home.
Right.
Just literally providing you everything, the material sense.
Exactly.
Right? But when you're talking about the emotional aspect of it, when you really start having conversations and reflections about what happened in childhood, maybe, you might say, but in our household, we don't really talk about emotions.
Right.
Right? Like, my parents didn't really ask me how I was feeling. We don't process stuff. When I was, overwhelmed, when I was sad, I was mainly left to my own self, right? To deal with it.
Right. Like or maybe they'll be like, oh, you're just hungry or just need a good rest. But oftentimes, and this is the difference between like physical neglect, which is not being left with like food or water, which is a very serious issue. But then there's also emotional neglect.
Yeah.
When all your physical needs were provided to you, and as a result, you feel like, oh, I should be like grateful to my parents and stuff.
Yeah.
But let's say when you were bullied at school or you tried very hard at a test and you didn't do as well as you expected, there was no hug. There was no comforting words.
They weren't like, mama's here, it's going to be okay, I'm here for you, it's going to be okay. Like those words, that sense of emotional attunement to what it is that you're going through and coming in with the right sort of support, it wasn't there.
Exactly. And this is why there is this feeling of emptiness. Because when you were a child, you needed these words of affirmation, these comforting words, this knowledge that somebody has your back during stressful times. Not just someone giving you the food and the water that you need to survive, but that knowledge that even when times get stressful, that there's somebody supporting you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, as adults, how we regulate our emotions, how we relate to, our internal world, with the world out there, how we love, how we form all these, protective coping mechanisms, it all goes back to what we saw in childhood, right? Because our primary caregivers, they were like our role models.
Exactly.
And we saw that and we modeled that type of behavioral pattern, that type of thinking, and that type of relating.
Right. And like all of these things that we mentioned previously, this low self-esteem, this loneliness, it's often not just us, the adults, feeling it, but that inner child, that child who was stuck at that time where they were emotionally neglected. It's coming over and taking over you and making you feel those same emotions, that same emptiness that they felt as a child.
Yeah, and that's what trauma does, right? Trauma creates this fragmentation of the self that creates these emotional parts that are stuck and frozen in the past. Right? So that's why you might find yourself in situations when you get triggered. You see these parts of you that react in a way that on a normal occasion you wouldn't.
Exactly.
Right? These emotional reactions often seem very disproportionate to whatever is going on there. And that is a very strong sign that it might really not be the adult self or the adult part inside of you that is actually at the forefront of what's going on here, but more about these younger wounded parts inside of you that remembers what it's like to be stuck in overwhelm and just be helpless in navigating through that stuckness. Yeah,
and going back to this idea of trauma, right? As a child, the idea that we have the same capacity as when we were adults to handle certain things, that's just not true. Because as a child, that's when we needed that support and safety the most. And even things that we can easily handle today as adults would be overwhelming to us as a child. And that's why we need that emotionally available and secure caretaker to help us and support us as we are exploring the world. But just to bring in what the concrete symptoms of CEN are, as a therapist, what do you think are the common symptoms of CEN?
I feel like one of the telltale signs of someone with CEN, it's definitely the difficulty in regulating their emotions. The feeling of feeling very easily overwhelmed whenever certain emotions come to you. And this is a learned thing, right? If as a childhood, during your childhood years, sadness, the emotion, anger, frustration were emotions that were often pushed aside, or you being told to, don't cry, or
just get over it, lah.
Yeah, just get over it, right? Why are you being angry? If you were not given the permission to feel anger, to feel sadness, internally what you've learned is that these emotions, sadness, anger, disappointment, frustration, are socially or just unacceptable emotions to be felt. So when it comes to you,
or just emotions in general, they aren't supposed to be felt.
Yeah. Or maybe you've been taught that only happy emotions are allowed to be felt.
Okay.
Right? But certain emotions like the not so good ones, like sadness and anger, no, don't feel them. Right? So every time they come to you, if your system has not learned or seen what it's like to hold space for these emotions, naturally when they come up to you in the present day, the system is automatically going to shut them down and immediately tell you that, okay, panic. I don't know how to deal with this. And it's going to come to you in the form of overwhelm.
Totally. And not just overwhelm, right? But I think for a lot of CEN survivors, I think even me included, before even the overwhelm, there's this idea, I don't know what I'm feeling now. I'm so disconnected with my current emotions that even in therapy sessions, it's so common when we ask clients, what are you feeling now?
Yeah.
What's the most common response is?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. Or the other one is, where do you feel the emotion in your body?
I don't know. Or I don't feel anything.
Yeah.
Numbness.
Exactly.
It's a very common symptom of someone with CEN.
Yeah. It's like you're in a fog, right? But you're just driving in a fog. You don't know what you're doing, where you're going. This idea of drifting both in life and just also when it comes to your emotions. You can't pinpoint what you're feeling. You also can't pinpoint the triggers as well. And I think that can be quite frustrating also for a lot of people. Even when my therapist asked me, what are you feeling right now? I actually felt quite annoyed or frustrated.
Why are you asking me this question?
Yeah, I already told you that I don't know so many times already, right? But then you're still asking me this question.
Yeah.
And that itself is not just a sign of CEN, but that somewhere along the line, you received the information or the signal that your emotions were not something to be accepted.
Or to be felt or to be experienced.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that often ties back, as you said, to the childhood experiences. And I think when we as children, we were stressed out, we would often go to our caretakers for support.
Yeah.
And when our caretakers were not as available or responsive as we would have liked them to be, the first thing that we usually try to do is we try and get their attention. We cry and we scream really, really loudly.
Throw tantrums.
Throwing stuff all over the place.
Yeah.
If it works, then we'll continue on with this response.
Yes.
But then on the other end of the spectrum, if it doesn't work, if our caretaker continues to be unavailable and unresponsive, what we usually do is we switch off that response. We turn off that response.
Yeah.
We go the complete other way and say, I don't need love.
Yeah.
I don't need support.
Yeah. And I think that contributes to very polarizing ways on how, as adults, you deal with the overwhelm.
Right.
So at one end, you have individuals who are very anxious, right? Very clingy when they're feeling the overwhelm. They need the partner around in order to feel that sense of safety.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you have individuals who will be really hyper-independent individuals, where they go, I don't need anybody.
Yeah.
I can rely on myself, and I don't need support. I don't need help. Right? So you find the polarizing ends, right? And for you, you identify yourself as someone who is hyper-independent. How has it been for you being this hyper-independent individual?
I think at the start, I wore it as a badge of honor, right? That, I don't need anybody. I'm by myself and I can handle life by myself. But then I realized that it wasn't because I was proud of being independent, but it's more of the fact that I didn't know how to ask for help. And then I also felt that asking for help was weak or vulnerable. And I was scared of that vulnerability. I was scared of opening up myself to others. And as a result, I was drifting alone. I was just suffering alone, even when asking for help was the most realistic or logical solution to do. And because of that fear, that unlocked a lot of opportunity for me to reflect and ask myself, why was I feeling this way?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was because whenever I asked for help, I was often shut down or shamed for my attempt to ask for help.
Yeah.
Right? And because of that, I also felt quite lonely. I was lonely, and I was telling myself, before I attended to my loneliness, I would achieve all of these different things. But the truth is, I was just procrastinating that need for connection because I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't know how to build meaningful connections because I switched off that response.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting how, our systems have developed these coping mechanisms in place in order to adapt to what we saw early on in our childhood experience.
And I think for listeners who are attuned to stuff like attachment styles, you notice that what we just talked about is attachment insecurity, the difference between a anxious attachment style, where we're like clinging to people, not just our caretakers, but also in our romantic relationships, in our friendships.
Yeah.
And then also the avoidant attachment style, where we switch off that experience, switch off that response. As if we're saying, oh, I'm thirsty, but there's no water around. So what I do is I'll switch off my thirst, my need for water. But you replace the water with like connection, and it's the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what we want to be able to do is to be able to be aware of what's going on, these presenting symptoms and struggles. Another thing that also came to me in terms of like common symptom is addiction.
Interesting.
And when we think about addiction, it's often like, substance abuse, alcohol, but addiction can come in various shapes and forms. Essentially, when you look into the definition of addiction, it's you going into these, tasks, experiences, and behaviors, knowing that, in the long term, it's going to cause a lot of harm to the self and to other people. But even with that knowledge, you cannot stop yourself from doing so.
Exactly.
So even a good thing can turn into something that's harmful. Like, for example, individuals who over-exercise.
Yeah, that's the first thing that came to my mind.
Right?
Going to the gym excessively. I live in the gym.
Overeat. I mean, eating is good. You need food to fuel your body. But when it comes to the state where you are overeating, that to me, it speaks again of a mind-body disconnection.
Right. Yeah, I just want to feel something.
Right? Addiction, essentially, it is fueling the need to feel something, to feel connected to something. Because CEN, it's a relational trauma, and trauma creates disconnection on the inside.
Exactly.
So how our system has been hardwired, it's hardwired for survival, right? It would do whatever it takes to feel that sense of something, to feel alive, to feel connected. It doesn't really care if that connection comes in a form that's harmful to you and to other people.
Yeah. I think the other thing that came to my mind was this idea of like overworking, right? That instinct to work and to prove yourself. But oftentimes that hides this insecurity, this idea of my worth lies in my achievements.
Yeah, because as a child, you probably learned that love is something that has to be earned.
Right.
Love is conditional, or you only got praises and compliments, and you were seen and accepted when your parents saw you doing well in school.
And any failure, as a result of that, any failure brings you this intense feeling of disappointment and overwhelm that you do anything to avoid that failure, even if it's like neglecting opportunities and sacrificing yourself just for the sake of work and just for the sake of achievement.
Yeah.
Right. And I think this conditional love is one type of childhood emotional neglect, like hiding love behind arbitrary milestones like grades or like competitions. In your experience, like what are some other common types of like emotional neglect?
Some of the examples of CEN would be, for example, if your parents were to say something mean to you, they hurt you, but they never really apologized.
Okay.
Right? So you know that, maybe they did something to hurt you, and you're waiting for an apology to come.
Right.
For them to say, I'm sorry for hurting your feelings. I'm sorry for not taking your feelings into consideration. But that apology never came.
Yeah.
And that is a lot for a child.
Yeah. It is an injustice, right? But when you normalize this feeling of injustice, you normalize this idea that when someone does wrong to you, like that's a natural thing when it's not.
Okay.
Yeah, it makes a child and then eventually the adult accept things which are unacceptable.
Which is why individuals of CEN also struggle with boundaries.
Yes, exactly.
They struggle with boundaries.
Yeah. Struggle with boundaries and being assertive as well. Which is why like passiveness is also a big issue in individuals with CEN.
Yeah, you probably have high tolerance to pain.
Yeah.
Thinking that it's okay, but
they have
it's not.
It's like you have an unlimited battery to please other people, to serve other people at expense of yourself.
And to tolerate a huge deal of disrespect.
Yeah. And I think some people think that it's a superpower that you can do this, but no,
it's not.
I'm like, no child should have to develop superpowers just to feel safe in their own
at the expense of their own well-being.
Exactly.
I mean, that's not a superpower.
Yeah. I think another common one is where if your mom is really anxious and she has all of these fears about you getting harmed or like you ruining your future, then she comes in to like micromanage all aspects of your life. And as a result,
is it like the helicopter parent?
Something like that. But I think that's the extreme end of the spectrum. There's also stuff like, you can't go out, or you have to do this, you have to do that, and or even like you have to be like a doctor or a lawyer. You can't be, anything else.
I feel that it's love masked in a form of control.
Exactly.
Because there are situations where you're like, I was in a very loving family. Like my mom and dad, they loved me, but when you really deep dive and peel off the layers a bit more, there was actually a lot of control and that was involved. Yeah,
and that control comes from fear, right? And that's why we say that oftentimes the parents have good intentions because they want us to have a better future. But when you say you have to be this certain profession, if not, like you won't have a future, or even like will disown you if you don't go this path.
Yeah.
They have your best intentions in mind, but that creates this fear in you. This idea that if you don't do things a certain way, that number one, you'll never be safe, and number two, you'll never be loved.
Yeah. And it also breeds a lot of shame, right? Because it creates this narrative of I can only be loved and my worth is tied to all these external achievements and how other people see me.
Right.
Which brings me to another point, which is individuals of CEN, you will often struggle with needing so much of external validation because how other people see you, it's super highly important.
Right.
Just the thought of people not seeing you in a good light would truly and deeply crush your soul.
Right. That and also rejection. When the idea of like someone not being able to love you turns you into this like obsessive, like I have to get this person to like love me. That is also a result of CEN.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because one of the big things about CEN is that it often, and I would say even usually, occurs in families where on the outside it seems very functional.
Yep.
There's not like overt trauma or conflict. On the surface, it seems like it's a model like family.
Yeah.
But deep inside, there's all of these hidden expectations and hidden fears and like we said, control issues that's governing the way that the parents are treating the children and sometimes even towards themselves also.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the key myths that we want to also debunk, that CEN only happens in abusive, chaotic, dysfunctional families, because that's not true. CEN can also happen and occur in families that are nurturing and loving.
Yeah, and I think one of the common examples of this is when, let's say you come from a more traditional conservative family, and especially your dad is a really kind of distant person, right? He's always working and he comes home late at night because he's working so hard.
It's like typical, like breadwinner, goes to work, bring in the money and income for the family.
Exactly. And then I think I heard one of my friends say like, I can count the number of sentences that I speak with my dad on a daily basis, or even weekly basis. And the thing is like that's what he was taught to do,
Yeah.
And that's what probably like the parents of our parents and their parents passed down this like idea that the breadwinner should be the one to like sacrifice himself for the family. But as a result, what is passed on is this idea that as long as I provide like money and provide that security to my family, then that's parenting, right? That's all I have to do.
Yep, exactly. It creates this environment of like being emotionally disconnected because you never really had a father figure who was able to emotionally attune to, what you were going through, right? Maybe he said, stop being a baby, or, like, don't cry. So you've
get over it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so you've learned through those experiences that to just intellectualize what it is that you're emotionally going through and not really feel so much of what it is that you're feeling.
Yeah, I think, not to make this into like guys versus girls things, but it's really like quite common for guys especially.
For males,
yeah. And you know what they do? Let's say when somebody comes in to vent about their problems, a lot of these people, especially guys, they'll solutionize, they'll intellectualize your problem. They'll treat you like a problem to solve.
Yes.
I think that's what a big issue that girls have with their boyfriends as well, in my experience.
They don't understand what I'm feeling, right? Because they go in straight to wanna like, okay, what's the problem here?
Correct.
Okay, like what can we do here? How do we fix this issue here?
Correct. And that's quite annoying, right? It's quite frustrating. Yeah, but I think most people don't really see that this could be a result of childhood emotional neglect.
Conditioning.
Exactly. It's like on the surface, it's a functional family, but there's this survival response that's often intergenerational. It's passed down throughout the generations. All right, so I think we've talked a lot about childhood emotional neglect and the different forms and symptoms of it. So I think a question that is in a lot of the listeners' minds is how do we actually deal with it? Please stay tuned to our next episode where we talk about the different ways of managing and healing childhood emotional neglect.
Yeah, stay curious and see you in the next episode. Bye.